The kingdom of Eldora was alive with the energy of preparation. The annual harvest feast, a celebration of the earth's bounty and the community's strength, was only hours away, and the castle's courtyard buzzed with relentless activity. Servants darted through narrow stone passages, carrying trays heaped with fresh fruits, golden loaves of bread, and earthenware bowls filled with spiced stews. The air was thick with the mingled scents of roasting meats, sweet honey, and the sharp tang of herbs. Laughter rose above the clatter of pots and the murmured commands of overseers, weaving through the air like a ribbon of light. In the midst of the controlled chaos moved Leora, a young servant girl whose presence was quieter than most. Her footsteps were careful, her gaze steady, though her clothes told a story of hardship, threadbare and patched in several places, her simple tunic no longer crisp or bright but faded and frayed. Yet her eyes were bright and observant, reflecting a quiet determination that set her apart from the other servants who seemed caught in the rush and worry of the day. Leora had been with the castle household for nearly 3 years, her tasks mostly unseen by the nobles she served. She was charged with cleaning the kitchen's corners and caring for the hearth fires, jobs that left her face smudged with ash by day's end but allowed little time for rest. She worked swiftly and silently, her fingers nimble and sure even when her back ached from the weight of long hours. To some, she was just another shadow in the grand castle. To others, a reminder of the servants' world, far removed from the silk and gold of the lords and ladies. Today, however, carried a different air. The harvest feast was a time when the entire castle came alive with color and music, when even the servants might catch glimpses of the grand hall's glittering chandeliers or hear the soft murmur of nobles exchanging toasts. But with the excitement came pressure, expectations that everything be perfect, from the smallest bowl of pottage to the elaborate tapestries draped on the walls. The courtyard was a blur of movement and sound. Near the great ovens, the head cook barked orders as apprentices kneaded dough and stoked fires. The clang of metal echoed from the smithy, where workers polished silver goblets that would soon hold the richest wines. Servants carried baskets overflowing with grapes and apples, their breaths quick and shallow as they dodged one another in narrow alleys. Leora moved carefully along the stone path, balancing a basket of fresh herbs gathered from the castle gardens. Her fingers brushed gently against the leaves of rosemary and thyme, the scents calming her nerves. She glanced up occasionally, catching brief flashes of vibrant banners fluttering in the breeze, and the gleam of polished armor worn by the king's guards standing at attention near the main gate. Though she wore no jewels or finery, Leora held herself with a quiet pride. She remembered her mother's voice from long ago, urging her to keep her head held high no matter what dirt or hardship life might place on her. True beauty, her mother had said, comes from within, and no smear on your face can hide that. The day had been long and Leora's feet ached, but she took solace in the small moments, pausing to watch a pair of young children practicing a lute near the servants' quarters, or hearing the melodic laughter of the castle's minstrel as he tuned his strings. There was a rhythm to the chaos, a pulse beneath the hurried steps and shouted commands that reminded her she was part of something greater. Yet not everyone shared her calm spirit. Among the servants was Leora, a girl close in age but sharp-tongued and quick to jealousy. She had long envied Leora's quiet confidence and the occasional smiles she received from the kitchen staff. Today, as tensions ran high and tempers flared, Leora's bitterness bubbled just beneath the surface, ready to spill over. In the cramped kitchen corner where the soot was stored, Leora stood with a pot nearly full of the black powder, grinding it with slow, deliberate motions. She watched Leora from the shadows, her eyes narrowing as the other girl passed by with her basket. A plan took shape in her mind, cruel and swift. As Leora moved toward the oven to set down her herbs, Leora seized her chance. With a quick step forward, she accidentally tipped the pot, sending a thick cloud of soot flying through the air. The black dust settled on Leora's face and hair, transforming her delicate features into a mask of grime and shadow. Time seemed to freeze for a heartbeat. Leora's bright eyes widened in shock as she reached up, her fingers tracing the dark streaks marring her skin. The once faint scent of rosemary was now overlaid with the acrid smell of smoke and ash. The servants around them paused, some stifling gasps, others biting back laughter. Leora's lips curled into a sly smile as she stepped back, watching the moment unfold with satisfaction. "Well," she said loudly enough for a few to hear, "looks like someone's ready for the feast after all." Her tone was sharp, dripping with mockery. Leora's heart pounded, but she forced herself to stand tall, wiping at her face with trembling hands though the soot only smeared further. She remembered her mother's words and took a deep breath, steadying herself against the sting of humiliation. The head cook, a gruff woman with a heart that rarely showed softness, scowled at Alara's mischief. "Enough," she barked. "Get back to work, both of you." But the damage was done. News of the incident spread swiftly through the castle, whispers following Leora like shadows. The other servants laughed behind cupped hands, and some avoided her gaze altogether. The soot that covered her face became more than dirt, it became a mark, a symbol of the day's cruel twist. Still, amidst the harshness, a few cast curious glances her way, sensing something unbroken beneath the soot and ragged clothes, a spark that even grime could not extinguish. As the sun climbed higher, the preparations pressed on, and the feast drew nearer. Leora, now the girl with the soot-blackened face, moved through the courtyard with quiet determination, unaware that this moment would change everything. Leora moved through the castle corridors like a shadow cloaked in soot, each step heavy with the weight of whispered laughter trailing behind her. The stone walls, once cold and unyielding, now seemed to close in tighter, echoing with cruel voices that cut sharper than any blade. Her once bright eyes, now darkened by the grime on her face, reflected the flickering torchlight as she passed, avoiding the curious or mocking glances from other servants. The castle, so alive with the promise of the harvest feast, had become a maze of humiliation for her. Every corner held the risk of a sneer, every doorway the threat of hushed mockery. In the servants' quarters, a group had gathered near the fire, their faces twisted in amusement as they exchanged cruel jokes. One young woman, Mirella, leaned back on her elbows, her laughter ringing clear and unrestrained. "Look at Leora," she said, eyes sparkling with malice. "She belongs in the ashes, not at the feast." Another, a lanky boy with a smirk that never quite reached his eyes, added, "She should hide in the cellar until all this is over. No one wants soot-streaked shadows serving their wine." Leora's heart clenched, but she held her head high, recalling the words her mother had once spoken softly in the dim light of their humble home. "No matter the filth you wear, never forget who you are inside. Hold your head high, and the world will follow your gaze." The voices pressed on, unrelenting. "Maybe she's cursed," whispered a third, eyes darting around as if afraid the words might summon misfortune. "Or maybe it's punishment for some secret sin." Despite the sting of their words, Leora steadied herself. She had always been different, quiet, observant, carrying an unseen strength beneath her gentle exterior. The soot that marred her face was nothing compared to the fire in her spirit, a flame that had survived the loss of her mother and the coldness of the castle's stone halls. She found a quiet corner near the kitchens, where the scent of baking bread and roasting meats mingled with the sharp tang of iron from the nearby forge. Here she paused, fingers trembling as she wiped at the grime again, knowing it would only smear. But this time her eyes did not fill with tears. Instead they held a quiet defiance. Passing servants threw sidelong glances, some shaking their heads with pity, others with thinly veiled amusement. A few offered small, uncertain smiles, silent acknowledgments of her dignity amidst the jeers. One older woman, a kind-hearted washer named Maris, caught Leora's eye and gave a brief nod of encouragement. It was a small gesture, but it filled her with a flicker of warmth. The castle's grandeur, with its towering stone pillars and gleaming chandeliers, felt distant and unwelcoming. Leora was reminded that in this world, appearance mattered more than truth, and those who bore the stains of misfortune were often cast aside. Yet, within her, a stubborn hope took root. She clung to the memory of her mother's strength, a beacon that cut through the darkness of mockery. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides as she resolved to face the feast with grace, no matter how others might see her. As the day wore on, the servants' laughter continued, but so too did Leora's quiet perseverance. In the midst of scorn, she moved with a steady purpose, preparing to serve at the feast not as a shadow to be ignored, but as someone who would not be broken by soot or spite. Her heart beat with a steady rhythm, a silent promise that the night's events would mark not her downfall, but the beginning of something new. The grand hall of Eldra was transformed into a dazzling spectacle that evening, alive with color and light as the harvest feast commenced. Massive banners hung from the vaulted ceilings, their rich fabrics embroidered with gold thread and vibrant symbols of the harvest, sheaves of wheat, ripe grapes, and the proud sun. Torches flickered along the walls, casting a warm glow over the polished stone floor, while musicians tuned their instruments, filling the space with the low hum of anticipation. Nobles and dignitaries gathered, their silks and velvets shimmering in hues of deep crimson, royal blue, and emerald green. Their jewelry sparkled with precious stones, and the clinking of goblets mingled with soft laughter and murmured conversations. Servants moved through the crowd with practiced ease, carrying trays piled high with delicacies, roasted boar glazed with honey, sweet cakes spiced with cinnamon, and goblets filled with the richest wines. At the center of the hall stood the high table, a long ornate bench where the king and his closest advisors would dine. It was here that Leora was summoned to serve, a decision that sent ripples through the room, for she was still marked by the soot that had so recently been spilled across her face and hair. Her entrance was subtle yet unavoidable. She stepped forward from the ranks of servants, her soot-darkened face framed by loose strands of hair that shimmered faintly in the torchlight. Her patched clothes, though humble, bore the signs of her steady work and quiet strength. Yet among the glittering nobles she looked out of place, an unwelcome contrast to their elegance. Some guests suppressed amused giggles behind their hands, exchanging quick glances as though sharing a private joke at her expense. A group of young ladies whispered among themselves, their eyes flicking pointedly toward Leora before darting away. Others frowned, disapproving of the king's decision to assign such a tarnished figure to the high table. Leora moved with practiced grace despite the weight of their scrutiny. She held her head high, recalling her mother's words and the quiet fire that refused to be extinguished. Her hands, steady and sure, carried platters of food and goblets of wine, weaving carefully between the seated nobles. The king himself sat at the center of the table, his posture regal but his eyes sharp and observant. He watched Leora with an intensity that set her apart from the rest of the hall. His gaze lingered not on her soot-streaked face, but on the poise and dignity she maintained. As she served, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some whispered about the servant girl's boldness, while others speculated on the king's unusual interest. A few of the older nobles exchanged worried looks, unsettled by the disruption to tradition. Despite the undercurrent of judgment, Leora focused on her duties, moving with a quiet confidence that seemed to draw the king's attention further. She poured wine into goblets with steady hands and offered platters laden with delicacies, all while the hall hummed with a mixture of curiosity and unease. The musicians began to play, their melodies rising in celebration of the harvest. The flicker of torchlight danced across the guests' faces, casting shadows that flickered like secrets waiting to be revealed. Leora's presence, marked by soot yet unbowed, became a silent testament to resilience amid opulence. As the feast unfolded, the tension in the room ebbed and flowed like a tide. Leora's quiet grace challenged the assumptions of those around her, while the king's unwavering gaze hinted at a story yet to be told. Though many still saw her as an outcast, to the king she was something far more compelling, a living symbol of dignity untainted by outward stains. And in that moment, beneath the glittering banners and amidst the music and laughter, Leora's fate began to shift in ways no one could have predicted. The grand hall seemed to pulse with life as King Arinda took his place at the high table, newly crowned yet already carrying the weight of his kingdom with a grace beyond his years. His dark eyes, sharp and reflective, scanned the gathering with the practiced attention of a ruler who knew that every detail, every whisper, could shape the fate of his reign. As Leora entered the hall to serve, her soot-streaked face a stark contrast against the tapestry of finery and silk, it was as though time momentarily slowed for Arinda. His gaze fixed on her, not with disdain or dismissal as many others might have, but with a quiet intensity that spoke of curiosity and something deeper, recognition, perhaps, of a spirit that refused to be bowed by circumstance. Her movements were deliberate and poised, a silent defiance woven into the fabric of her every step. Though her appearance was marked by the grime of her misfortune, she carried herself with an unspoken dignity that challenged the opulence surrounding her. The king watched as she moved among the nobles, delivering wine and dishes with steady hands, her eyes briefly meeting his more than once. Arinda's mind wandered beyond the feast, tracing the outline of this girl who seemed both fragile and formidable. He noted how her gaze, though modest, held a spark of determination that resonated with the ideals he hoped to embody as ruler. She did not cower beneath the weight of her humiliation, instead she wore it as a cloak of resilience. Whispers rippled through the hall as others noticed the king's lingering attention. Some eyebrows lifted in surprise, others narrowed in suspicion. The court was a place of tradition and appearance, and here was the young monarch focusing not on silk or jewels, but on a servant girl marked by soot. The musicians' melodies swelled, filling the space with a sense of celebration, yet beneath the surface the room held its breath. Arinda found himself drawn to Leora's quiet strength, a reminder that true nobility was not bestowed by birth or garb but by character and courage. As the feast progressed, their eyes met again. This time the king saw more than just the soot. He saw the fire within her, a promise of something rare and unyielding. In that shared glance, an unspoken understanding passed between them, a connection forged not by words but by the recognition of shared endurance. Arinda's thoughts drifted to the future, imagining a kingdom where dignity was not measured by outward appearance but by the heart's resolve. Leora, with her soot-covered face and unwavering grace, became a living symbol of this vision. The nobles around the table shifted uneasily, sensing the change in the room's energy. Some whispered of impropriety, others of folly, but the king's gaze remained steady, unwavering in its focus. As the night deepened, Arinda resolved to learn more about the girl who had captured his attention so completely. Behind the glittering banners and the clinking of goblets, a new story was beginning, one that would challenge the kingdom's old ways and redefine what it meant to be truly noble. In the heart of the feast, amid the music and laughter, the king's eyes refused to look anywhere else but on Leora, marking the first step in a journey that would change them both forever. The grand hall was alive with the murmur of nobles as the feast continued to unfold beneath the shimmering banners and flickering torchlight. The clinking of goblets and soft laughter created a backdrop for the more secretive conversations that wove themselves quietly through the high table's occupants. Among them, the king's unwavering gaze fixed on Leora, a sight that did not escape the watchful eyes of the assembled lords and ladies. Whispers began almost immediately, slipping like shadows between the polished goblets and embroidered robes. Some nobles exchanged glances, their faces a mixture of surprise, curiosity, and disapproval. Lady Myrina, known for her sharp tongue and unyielding adherence to tradition, leaned toward her companion with a subtle scowl. "Is it wise, my lord," she murmured, "to give such attention to a servant girl? She bears the marks of misfortune, not nobility." Her companion, Lord Darren, smirked, his eyes twinkling with a hint of amusement. "Perhaps the king sees something we do not," he replied, fingers drumming lightly against the table. "Or perhaps this is the beginning of a story that will shake the very foundations of our court." Across the table, a younger noblewoman named Celine whispered to a friend, her voice barely audible. "They say the king's heart is soft, but this is unexpected. To focus on one so humble, especially now." Her words carried a mixture of skepticism and fascination, a testament to the shifting tides within the court. Among the murmurs, some nobles exchanged thinly veiled criticisms. "A servant at the high table is one thing," an older lord grumbled quietly. "But one with soot-streaked face? It mocks the dignity of the feast." Others nodded in agreement, their disapproval barely concealed beneath polite smiles. Despite the undercurrent of judgment, a few voices softened in Leora's defense. An elderly lady, Lady Hespera, whose wisdom and years granted her a voice few dared to question, leaned back and sighed. "True worth is not measured by the cloth one wears but by the strength of one's spirit. The king's gaze may be the only one here that sees this." Leora, unaware of the intricate web of gossip weaving around her, focused solely on her duties. Each step she took was measured, her hands steady as she poured wine and offered delicacies to the guests. Her face, still marked by the soot, was calm and composed, betraying none of the turmoil she might have felt inside. The music swelled, a haunting melody played by skilled musicians whose eyes occasionally flicked toward the unfolding drama. The feast, a spectacle of opulence and ceremony, continued uninterrupted by the whispered judgments and hopes circulating at the high table. As the evening wore on, the tension grew palpable. The nobles watched for signs, glances exchanged, subtle gestures, that might hint at how the king's interest in Leora would evolve. Some waited with bated breath, curious to see whether this servant girl would rise beyond her station or be cast aside like so many before her. Yet, through it all, Leora remained a steady presence, her quiet grace a silent rebuke to the court's expectations. Her unwavering focus and dignity challenged the rigid boundaries of status and appearance that had long defined the kingdom's social order. In the midst of whispered doubts and secret hopes, the king's gaze remained fixed, his silent vote of confidence transforming the atmosphere. And though the nobles' voices buzzed with speculation, none could deny the undeniable truth. Something extraordinary was unfolding beneath the glittering banners of the feast. The evening deepened, and the grand hall of Eldora transformed from a place of feasting into a stage for entertainment. The musicians shifted their tunes from lively fanfares to softer, more intricate melodies that filled the room with a sense of enchantment. Dancers took to the polished floor, their movements weaving stories of the harvest, the seasons and the spirits that blessed the land. The flickering torchlight cast long shadows that danced along the stone walls, making the entire hall seem alive with mystery and magic. Amidst the swirling figures and the lively music, King Arinda remained seated at the high table, his gaze fixed unwaveringly on the figure of Leora. She moved quietly among the guests, serving wine and delicacies, her soot-darkened face a stark contrast to the gleaming silks and jewels around her. Yet there was something about her presence that seemed to quiet even the loudest murmurs, a stillness that drew the king's attention more deeply than before. As the music softened into a gentle rhythm, Arinda raised his hand, signaling to one of his attendants. A hush began to fall over the hall, the nobles sensing that something unexpected was about to unfold. The king's voice, calm and clear, carried across the room. "Leora," he called, his tone both formal and inviting, "come serve me here at the table." A ripple of surprise swept through the gathered crowd. Servants rarely, if ever, served the king directly in such a public setting, especially one marked by soot and humble dress. Eyes widened, and whispers fluttered like restless birds as all waited to see how Leora would respond. Leora's heart fluttered beneath her soot-streaked skin, but she stepped forward with the same quiet grace that had marked her every move that day. Her footsteps were measured, and her eyes held a steady calm that belied the fluttering inside. The torchlight caught the dark streaks across her face and hair, making them shimmer like the embers of a dying fire. As she approached the king's seat, the music softened further, and a respectful silence fell over the hall. Every eye turned toward her as she knelt to pour wine into Arinda's goblet, the smooth motion of her hands a contrast to the tension in the air. Arinda's eyes met hers, holding her gaze as the last drop of wine slid into the glass. His voice was low but carried clearly to the ears of all present. "What is your name?" he asked. The hall seemed to hold its breath, the usual hum of conversation fading into stillness. Leora looked up, her eyes shining in the torchlight like twin embers. Her voice, soft but steady, answered, "Leora, my king." For a fleeting moment, the grand hall was suspended in silence, the weight of the moment pressing gently on every soul present. Nobles blinked in surprise, some uncertain whether to applaud or remain still, while the servants held their breath. The king's gaze softened, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "Leora," he repeated, the name carrying a weight beyond mere formality. "You carry yourself with a dignity that no soot can diminish." The musicians slowly resumed their playing, the melodies swelling once more, but the energy in the hall had shifted irrevocably. Where there had been whispers of mockery and doubt, now there was a growing sense of respect and wonder. Leora, though still marked by the soot and the hardships of her day, stood taller in that moment. The king's recognition was more than a simple gesture, it was a declaration that true worth lay beneath the surface, in the strength of the spirit. As the feast continued under the shimmering banners and the flickering torchlight, the dance of shadows on the walls seemed to echo the unfolding story, a tale of resilience, dignity, and the quiet power of one girl who had refused to be defined by the marks upon her skin. Leora's heart pounded like a drum in her chest as she watched from the shadowed corner of the grand hall. The flickering torchlight caught her narrowed eyes, reflecting the flicker of envy and fear that churned within her. What had begun as a cruel prank, a pot of soot tipped onto Leora's face, had taken on a life far beyond her control. The king's unwavering attention to the servant girl unsettled the very foundation of her carefully held place in the castle hierarchy. Leora had expected laughter, mockery, maybe some fleeting whispers of gossip at most. Instead, she found herself shrinking beneath the king's gaze, feeling her own status threatened by the girl she had meant to humiliate. The murmurs among the nobles only deepened her anxiety, whispers of Leora's quiet dignity, the king's fascination, and the changing winds at court reached her ears like a growing storm. Determined to reclaim her standing and quash the threat Leora posed, Leora began to weave a plan, a swift, cutting maneuver that would strike at the heart of the servant girl's newfound favor. She needed to turn the nobles against Leora, to remind them of her place and shatter the illusion of respect that seemed to be blossoming. Leora found her target in Lady Visara, a noblewoman known for her sharp mind and influence over court opinions. Lady Visara's beauty was matched only by her penchant for gossip and her loyalty to the traditions that had long ruled Eldora. If Leora could plant a seed of doubt in Visara's mind, the ripples would spread quickly. Catching Visara alone near the feast refreshment table, Leora lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, her words laced with false sweetness. "Lady Visara," she began, "I must share something troubling about the servant girl who caught the king's eye." Visara's eyes narrowed, curiosity piqued. "Go on," she said, her tone inviting but cautious. Leora's voice dropped further, "I have heard from trusted sources that Leora has shown disrespect to those above her station. Quiet moments where she has sneered at the nobles and ignored their commands. It's unbecoming, and surely the king must not be aware of such insolence." Lady Visara's lips curled into a slight smile, the kind that promised mischief. Such claims, if true, would indeed be cause for concern. It would be dangerous to allow such behavior to go unchecked. Emboldened by Visara's response, Leora pressed on, weaving a web of carefully crafted half-truths and innuendos designed to poison the court's perception of Leora. She spoke of a whispered conversation overheard near the kitchens, of a servant who claimed Leora laughed at a noble's fall, and of small acts of defiance masked beneath her quiet exterior. As Leora spun her tale, the noblewoman's expression shifted from curiosity to concern, and then to determination. "Thank you for confiding in me," Visara said, her voice low but firm. "I shall keep a watchful eye on this matter." Leora felt a rush of triumph. The first stones in the foundation of her scheme were laid. She returned to the shadows, heart racing but mind already plotting the next moves in her campaign to bring Leora low. Meanwhile, the castle buzzed with a mixture of excitement and unease. The feast continued, but beneath the surface, alliances shifted and secrets stirred. Leora remained unaware of the whispered plots, her focus on service and survival unwavering. Yet, the seeds of discord had been planted, and the court's eyes would soon be watching more closely than ever. The grand hall was thick with tension as the feast continued, the vibrant celebration now tinged with a sharper edge. Lady Visara, her eyes glinting with cold calculation, rose from her seat at the high table. Her gaze swept the room until it settled on Leora, the soot-streaked servant girl who had unwittingly become the center of the evening's drama. With a voice that carried through the hall, clear and commanding, Lady Visara spoke. "Leora," she said, "approach and serve the wine to this table, as is fitting for one of your station." Her words were laced with disdain, and the underlying challenge was unmistakable. The gathered nobles turned their eyes toward the young servant, their expressions a mix of curiosity and anticipation. They waited for her to falter, to stumble under the weight of the humiliation about to be imposed upon her. Leora's heart beat steadily, though her hands trembled slightly as she moved forward. She kept her eyes lowered, mindful of the whispers swirling around her like a dark cloud. The demand was clear. She was to serve the wine while kneeling, a gesture meant to emphasize her lower status and invite scorn. Without hesitation, Leora obeyed. She lowered herself onto one knee, steadying the tray of goblets in her hands. Her movements were precise and careful, a quiet refusal to give her tormentors the satisfaction of seeing her break. The hall fell into a hush, every eye fixed on the unfolding scene. As she knelt and began to pour the wine, the delicate crystal goblets catching the torchlight, a murmur ran through the crowd. Some nobles smirked at the spectacle, convinced that this moment would shatter any remaining illusions of dignity the girl held onto. Others shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension but unsure where their loyalties lay. Just as Leora lifted a goblet to serve Lady Visara, a sharp voice cut through the murmurs. "Enough." King Arinda's command was firm and unyielding, silencing the room instantly. All eyes turned to the young monarch, seated at the head of the table, his expression grave yet resolute. He rose slowly, his presence commanding respect without the need for raised voice or harsh words. "Leora," he said, "rise. You will serve me as a guest, not as a subject to be humiliated." Leora's eyes lifted, meeting the king's steady gaze. Relief and gratitude washed over her as she stood, the weight of the moment settling around her like a protective cloak. The nobles murmured among themselves, some in surprise, others in begrudging respect. The clear message was unmistakable. The king would not tolerate cruelty or disrespect, especially toward those who showed true grace. Leora stepped forward, serving the king with steady hands and unwavering poise. The act, simple yet profound, resonated through the hall. It was a declaration that dignity was not granted by birth or station but earned through character and courage. Lady Visara's lips pressed into a thin line, her plans for public humiliation thwarted. The seeds of discord had been planted, but the king's intervention reminded all present that the rules of the court were changing. As the feast resumed, the energy in the room shifted once more. The guests drank and danced, the music rising in celebration, yet beneath the surface the story of Leora and the king's favor continued to unfold, an unexpected tale of resilience, honor, and the quiet power of one girl who refused to be broken. The feast had drawn to a close, the last notes of music fading into the quiet night. The grand hall, once filled with laughter and chatter, now rested under a soft cloak of calm. Flickering torchlight spilled shadows across the stone walls as guests slowly rose and made their way toward the castle's exits, their footsteps echoing softly. King Arinda remained seated for a moment longer, his gaze still lingering on the spot where Leora had stood, soot-streaked but unbowed, a figure of quiet strength in a world of silk and gold. Then, rising with the grace of one who carries both authority and thoughtfulness, he stepped down from the high table and moved toward the heavy wooden doors leading to the courtyard. Leora, standing nearby, caught the subtle nod that invited her to follow. Her heart quickened, a mixture of anticipation and uncertainty stirring within her. She brushed the soot lightly from her cheek as though preparing herself for whatever might come next. Outside, the courtyard stretched wide beneath the starlit sky, the cool night air a balm after the warmth and noise of the feast. The soft rustle of leaves in the garden and the distant call of night birds created a peaceful backdrop, far removed from the murmurs and judgment of the hall. The king's footsteps were steady beside her as they walked along the cobblestone path, the silence between them comfortable rather than awkward. At last Arinda spoke, his voice low and sincere. "Leora," he began, "tonight you showed a dignity that many here lack. In a place where appearance often holds more weight than character, you have reminded us all of a greater truth." She met his eyes, searching for meaning behind his words. The weight of the evening's events pressed gently between them, a bridge connecting two lives that had rarely crossed before. "You must understand," he continued, "that here in this palace, your place is not fixed by the marks of soot or the clothes you wear. It is defined by the strength of your spirit and the grace with which you carry yourself." Leora's breath caught, the king's words a balm to the wounds of the day. For so long she had felt invisible, a shadow in the grand scheme of the castle. But now, beneath the stars and away from prying eyes, her worth was acknowledged in a way she had never known. Arinda's gaze softened. "I cannot promise that the road ahead will be easy. The court is a place of tradition and scrutiny, and change is never welcomed without resistance. But know this, you have opened a door that many believed locked." He paused, then added with a faint smile, "Your place here may soon change, Leora. Not because of the soot that marks you now but because of the fire you carry within." The quiet night seemed to hold its breath as the two stood together, the promise of a new beginning shimmering between them like the stars above. Leora felt a surge of hope, a sense that her journey was only just beginning. Whatever lay ahead, she would face it with the same quiet strength that had carried her through the day. Together they turned back toward the castle, the weight of the past lifting with each step. The night air was filled with possibility, and beneath the vast sky, a new chapter was ready to unfold. The morning sun spilled golden light across the palace gardens, where the air was thick with the scent of blooming jasmine and freshly turned earth. The courtyard, usually a place of quiet respite for nobles and servants alike, now buzzed with whispered rumors that fluttered like restless butterflies through the marble halls. From the highest towers to the lowest kitchens, the story of last night's feast had taken on a life of its own. Some whispered that the king had been enchanted by a spell, his eyes bewitched by the Soot Street servant girl. Others murmured of madness, a young monarch losing his grip on tradition and order. Yet, amidst the swirling gossip, one fact remained undeniable. Leora had captured the king's attention, and nothing would be the same again. Summoned to the royal gardens, Leora felt her heart beat with a mixture of anticipation and nerves. The path wound gently between beds of vibrant flowers and neatly trimmed hedges, their colors vibrant under the bright morning sun. She moved quietly, the soft rustle of her footsteps mingling with the distant songs of birds. At the far end of the garden, near a marble fountain that caught the light in shimmering sprays, King Arinda awaited her. His expression was calm, a stark contrast to the murmurs that filled the palace corridors. As she approached, he rose and offered a small, genuine smile. "Leora," he said, his voice steady and kind, "come walk with me." They strolled along the winding paths, the world around them momentarily shrinking to the space between them. The king's gaze was thoughtful, his steps measured. "I have thought much about last night," he began. "Your dignity and grace have spoken louder than any courtly speech or royal decree. I see in you a strength that this kingdom needs." Leora listened, her breath steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside. "It is with this in mind that I offer you a place by my side, as my personal attendant. You will no longer serve in shadows or soot, but in the light of this palace, with all the honor that entails." Her eyes widened in surprise, but she did not speak immediately. The weight of the offer settled over her, a promise of change and new beginnings. Around them, the garden bloomed in vivid color, the fragrance of hope hanging in the air. Arinda continued, "I know there will be those who oppose this, who whisper and plot to see you cast back into obscurity. But know this, you have the king's trust and protection." Leora felt a surge of gratitude and determination. The journey ahead would not be easy, but with the king's support she could face whatever challenges awaited. As they paused beside the fountain, the sunlight danced on the rippling water, reflecting the bright possibilities now unfolding before her. Beyond the garden walls, the palace murmurs grew louder, but inside this quiet moment, Leora's story took a new turn, a tale no longer bound by soot or shame, but by courage, hope, and the unyielding power of dignity. The morning sun spilled golden light across the palace grounds, casting long shadows beneath the towering oaks and blooming gardens. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and freshly turned earth, a sharp contrast to the heavy tension that had taken root inside the castle walls. News of the previous night's feast had spread like wildfire, its whispers twisting and turning through every corridor, chamber, and courtyard. The grand hall, once filled with glittering nobles and eager servants, now echoed with rumors and speculations that none could fully silence. Some said the king had been enchanted, bewitched by the soot-covered servant girl who moved with quiet dignity despite her appearance. Others whispered that the young monarch was mad, his heart softening at the wrong moment and threatening to unravel the strict order of the court. In the kitchens and servant quarters, the story was told with varying degrees of awe and skepticism. Leora's name, once barely spoken, was now carried on every breath. Her quiet strength had become the spark for hope in some and the seed of jealousy in others. Leora, the servant who had spilled the soot in an act of petty cruelty, was seething with fury. Her whispers to Lady Visara had not had the effect she had hoped. Instead, the king's favor for Leora had only grown stronger, defying the carefully laid plans to humiliate her further. The jealousy in the castle was a living thing, twisting through the marble halls and gilded chambers like a dark shadow. As the morning sun climbed higher, a summons was sent to Leora. A royal messenger found her near the garden gates, his voice respectful yet urgent. "The king requests your presence in the royal gardens, Mistress Leora." Leora's heart fluttered with a mix of nervousness and anticipation. The royal gardens were a place of beauty and power, where decisions were made away from the prying eyes of the court. She smoothed her soot-streaked clothes as best she could and made her way through the winding paths lined with blooming roses and towering hedges. When she arrived, King Arinda was already there, standing beneath a grand oak whose branches stretched wide and strong. The morning light filtered through the leaves, casting dappled patterns on the stone bench where he waited. His eyes brightened as she approached, the warmth of his smile easing some of her tension. "Leora," he said, rising to greet her, "thank you for coming." She bowed her head respectfully. "My king." He gestured toward the bench. "Please sit with me." For a moment neither spoke. The birdsong was the only sound, weaving through the garden like a soft melody. Finally Arinda broke the silence. "Last night was unlike any feast I have ever witnessed. You carry yourself with a dignity that commands respect, far beyond your station." Leora's cheeks flushed with a mix of pride and humility. "I only sought to serve, my king." "And serve you have," he replied. "But I see now that your role in this palace may be far greater than that of a servant. I wish to offer you a position as my personal attendant." The words hung in the air, heavy with promise and possibility. Leora's breath caught. This was more than she had dared to hope for, a chance to step beyond the shadows of soot and scorn into a place where her worth could be truly seen. I am honored, my king," she said softly. Arinda smiled. "You will have access to the council chambers, the libraries, and the private chambers. You will be by my side as I navigate the challenges of rule. Your counsel, your strength will be invaluable." He paused, his gaze steady. "But understand this, such a role will not be without challenges. There will be those who oppose you, who see you as an outsider. You must be prepared to stand firm." Leora nodded, determination settling in her heart. "I will not falter." The king's smile deepened. "Good. Together we will bring change to this kingdom, change that honors dignity above appearance, strength above birthright." As they sat beneath the ancient oak, the palace behind them seemed both distant and immediate, a world of power and tradition, now opening to the possibility of something new. Word of Leora's new position spread quickly, sparking a whirlwind of reactions throughout the castle. Some greeted the news with disbelief, others with hope, and many with bitter envy. The palace was alive with conversation, the old order shaking in the face of this unexpected shift. Leora's fury reached a boiling point. Her whispered plots and schemes now turned desperate as she realized that her attempts to humiliate Leora had only strengthened the girl's place in the king's heart and court. She gathered allies among the discontented nobles, plotting to undermine Leora's influence before it could fully take root. But Leora was not alone. Loyal friends, including the kindly washer Maris and the wise Lady Hespera, offered their support and guidance. The king himself stood as a steadfast protector, his belief in her unwavering despite the whispers and opposition. Days turned into weeks, and the palace slowly adjusted to the new reality. Leora's presence in the king's chambers brought a fresh perspective, her insights grounded in experience and empathy rather than privilege. The court's rigid hierarchy began to bend, if only slightly, under the weight of this quiet revolution. In the royal gardens, beneath the sprawling oak, Leora and King Arinda often met to discuss the future of the kingdom, of justice and of hope. Their partnership, forged in the fires of adversity and strengthened by mutual respect, became a beacon for those yearning for change. The story of the soot-covered servant girl who had captured the king's gaze was no longer just a tale whispered in the shadows. It had become a legend of resilience, dignity, and the transformative power of recognizing true worth. And as the seasons changed, so too did the kingdom, blossoming into a place where courage and heart were the true measures of nobility.